Please welcome Michael Pollan, Patrick Holden, Danielle Nierenberg, Ron Shaich, Jack Sinclair.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? Well, I'm very excited by the group that the New York Times has managed to pull together here. We have, I think, the man who buys more groceries than anyone in the world. Is that fair? Maybe there's somebody in China. But
quite scary. Yeah, maybe China.
Jack Sinclair, who's vice president for grocery at Walmart. Danny Nierenberg, who operates Food Tank and has been all over the world looking at agriculture at a great variety of scales and knows a lot about the global part of the story. Ron Shaich, who is at Panera, and he buys a lot of groceries too. He's got 2,000 restaurants. So to talk about scale, we have some good people to talk about scale. And Patrick Holden, who is a farmer in Wales, makes one of the most delicious cheddars, or his son does, and grows a lot of other things, and is also head of the Sustainable Food Trust, and was formerly head of the Soil Association. So it's a great pleasure to have you all here. One of the most persistent challenges really, to the sustainable food marketplace has been the question of scale. How can sustainable food production and distribution be scaled up to meet the demands of a huge domestic and global marketplace? And how can small producers profitably and equitably engage with huge buyers, and vice versa? Or should those small producers perhaps not try? What's in it doing it, and what's in it not doing it? The question actually has two parts, one on either side of the so-called farm gate. There's the issue of scaling up the methods of sustainable agriculture. Is there something inherent about sustainable agriculture that dictates these farms remain small? Is it simply more labor intensive? Can you practice diversified agriculture on a really large scale? That's one question. And then on the other side of the farm gate, how can large companies deal with the challenges? A large company, big tends to like to deal with big, fewer transaction costs, ease of operation. But when there are reasons to deal with smaller, how do you figure it out? How do you reimagine your global supply chain to do that and deal with lots of small producers? I remember the first time this issue ever came onto my radar was I was talking to Bill Nyman back when he had Nyman Ranch and Nyman Pork. And he told me this story about connecting with Chipotle and making the case that the way he was growing pork, or the way his farmers were in Iowa, which is to say outside, on pastures, and not in confinement, not living above manure pits, that Chipotle very much wanted to switch. And he was thrilled. This was the big break. This was going to get Nyman Pork off the ground. And he said to Steve Ells, or whoever he was dealing with at Chipotle, okay, how much do you need? And Steve Ells says, 10 train cars a week of sustainable pork. Well, there wasn't even one train car in the whole country at that point, and the deal didn't happen. But it happened several years later. They got there. So one of the other questions is, too, how do you build a market for antibiotic-free meat, say? How do you build a market for pastured animal protein? If a big buyer is interested in it, but the supply simply isn't there. What I'd like to do, partly to save my voice and partly because they all have really good stories to tell, is I've told them they can each take 5 minutes and tell a little bit about how they address this issue of scale in their own work. And then I'll ask a few questions and try to get them to ask each other some questions, and then throw it open to you. So let's start with Jack Sinclair.
Yep.
Jack, thank you.
Thanks very much, and thanks very much for inviting me here today. I'm really excited. I've learned tons from listening to all the presentations this morning. It really does open your eyes when you see the expertise in the room and the thought-provoking challenges for a business that sources more food than anyone else in the world. When we think about sustainability, we think through a lens of buying. Today we buy 1.1 billion pounds of bananas. Well, in 2018, we'll have to buy 1.8 billion pounds of bananas. I think it takes something like 29 gallons of water to produce one banana, not even a bunch of bananas, one banana. Think about the scale of the water use in that context. And if you go through commodity after commodity, that's how we're thinking about how we source the product more efficiently. And our challenge in selling food to so many people, 140 million Americans and over 200 million across the world, is how do we do it safely, how do we do it affordably, and how do we do it sustainably? We have to do it in such a way that we'll be able to do it forever. And that continuous improvement that was talked about earlier is a really important part of the lens of sustainability. When we first got involved in the sustainability program a few years ago, many years ago, it was very good for our business. We were able to reduce our energy costs, we were able to reduce the distance our trucks were going, able to use more efficient usage of energy in our stores, able to use less packaging in the product that we use. Simple lens of making things more accessible and more affordable. When you get in to look at the sustainability of the food industry, it gets more complex. When you go to Mississippi and see great farmers producing great corn and great soy with really using fertilizer, maybe too much fertilizer, then the next day you go into the Gulf of Mexico and you go out with fishermen and you see the dead zone and the impact of what's happening on Louisiana fishermen. This interdependency that was talked about earlier. How do we manage the understanding of an efficiency in one part of the chain, creating an inefficiency in another part of the chain? And that's something that we're really wrestling with as to how to really challenge sustainability. But I think as we think about the future, I think it's worth celebrating the past. People like Norman Borlaug, who was an amazing American Nobel Peace Prize winner, because he learned how to produce more food more efficiently and feed starving people. It's not that long ago in the 50s and 60s where there was predictions of mass starvation. And Europe was on food rationing. And, my parents tell me about being on food rationing in the 50s and 60s, what it's like to be that. The food system has improved and dramatically improved the capacity for the world to feed itself. So what do we need to do to feed 9 billion going forward? And that's really the crux of the challenge. So as Walmart thinks about how do we source these 1.7 billion pounds of bananas, we want to do it more affordably, because not everybody can afford to shop in boutique grocery stores. We want to do it affordably, but we want to do it sustainably. And the challenge that we face, I think, is the challenge that faces the world on a much larger scale. How do we produce more food at a lower cost so that we can feed more people more efficiently? So what are the kind of things we need to do? We need to waste less food. It's crazy when you go into Washington State and you see apple orchards, most fantastic apple orchards, and then the apples that don't fit the specification are lying on the ground. So we're going to build an apple processing plant there to try and get some fruit juice. Apple juice comes in from China, would you believe? All the concentrated apple juice that most of you drink, it comes from China. There's an opportunity for us to use more, when you bring scale to bear, to be more efficient in the use of lots of scarce resources that are being abused effectively in lots of the food system that go. We think we need to embrace new sources of supply, and that links to local. The energy costs have made California less attractive long term. So the opportunity to develop the Mississippi River Delta, develop the Carolinas, develop Virginia, we're working very hard at how fertile soil could be better used. And it doesn't just apply in America. Places like Peru, where the world's changed fast, they've got great water for supply from the Andes. How can we start to use more fertile opportunities to use more fertile land going forward? Embracing enabling technologies. How do we start using these micro-irrigation techniques that are so... you go to Israel and you see the way they can drop one drop of water onto one little root, and then the next root doesn't get it because it doesn't need it. And the technology that's going to efficient agriculture, and I think embracing those technologies, encouraging how those technologies can be spread around the world, there's real opportunity to produce more food. And finally, working together, I think, is really, really important to try and get away from the polarization that's existing in the food industry. We have to all work on this together. Big companies, small companies, food companies, retail companies, manufacturing companies, NGOs, economists. There's a challenge in front of us all, and I think if we tackle it, and that's why conferences like this are so valuable.
Thank you, Jack. I have some follow-ups, but I'll save them until we go around the horn. Danny.
But before I begin, I just want to thank the New York Times and Stone Barns for putting on this event. Again, I think bringing people together is so important. I'm thrilled that Food Tank is one of the media partners, and I'm especially honored to be on this panel with all of these great gentlemen. I think that for me, the question...
Will you just give one sentence what Food Tank is? We all know what Walmart is.
Sure.
But we don't know what Food Tank is. You don't yet have the brand recognition.
Almost. Food Tank is a research organization devoted to cultivating a better food system. And we do that by bringing individuals and content and research and organizations and events together to really push for food system change. So we have a website, it's foodtank.com. I encourage you to visit it and sign up for our newsletter. So the question of scale for me really implies that we'll have bigger, fewer farms. And what I think we need is smaller and more medium-sized farms who are using agroecological practices. We need more people, as Wendell Berry likes to say, and Fred Kirschman reminded me last night, more people who have an affection for the land and who are truly invested in preserving it for future generations. My experience, as Michael said, is mostly focused on agriculture in the developing world. And I've had this incredible honor and opportunity to visit 50+ countries in sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, and Latin America, and interview hundreds and hundreds of farmers and farmers groups and other stakeholders in the food system. And what I learned is that there are more than 500 million family farmers across the globe. 72% of those farmers are producing food on less than 2 hectares of land. And that's about 5 acres, which the folks at Stone Barns have told me they're producing on around 5.5 acres for the crops they're producing. The pasture land is around 22 acres, so I just wanted to give a comparison. And so the family farmers, these 500 million family farmers, are producing 80% of the world's food. And so for them, the majority of these farmers, it's not necessarily about making their farms bigger or scaling up. It's really about scaling up the things that help them do their jobs better. And it's about realizing that small-scale farmers who get blamed for everything from deforestation to water pollution to climate change are really not the villains, and that they shouldn't be blamed. They are the preconditions for really building a sustainable food system and a sustainable economy. And it's really about doing things like scaling extension services and education around low-cost, high-impact, sustainable food practices. It's about scaling participatory research practices that really value the knowledge that farmers have without exploiting them. It's about scaling up the infrastructure, as Jack just said a few minutes ago, to reduce post-harvest losses and food waste, and that's something that Jonathan and Doug and Dana will talk about in a little while. Things like roads, simple infrastructure, better harvesting and storage practices, better cooling and processing centers. These are all things that can really help farmers get their crops to get their harvest to market and earn better incomes. And it's about finding ways for farmers and farm laborers and food system workers to organize themselves into unions and cooperatives and other organizations so that they have the power to work with some of the big businesses and that they can organize themselves and really push for better food system policies. And it's about investing in rural areas and making them attractive, intellectually stimulating, economically sustainable places for people to live. For youth in the developing world, they see agriculture as a burden. They see it as something that they are forced to do, not something that they want to do. Unlike farmers in Brooklyn and San Francisco who are, it's the hip, in vogue thing to do. We really need to engage those farmers and find ways for them to feel like the food system is an opportunity, not just as farmers, but certainly as farmers, but also as chefs and cooks, agronomists, extension workers, scientists, researchers, storytellers like Michael Pollan. We need more of those folks in the food system, and so that they look at it as this incredible opportunity to make change and to earn income. And it's about really scaling the investment for women and finding ways to make sure that they have equality in all aspects of their lives, including agriculture. According to the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, if women had the same resources as male farmers, they could lift 100 to 150 million people out of hunger. And these are points that, you know, I know I'm talking about the developing world, but they're also applicable in the United States and other Western countries. And what we really need for farmers all over the world is better recognition that they're not only calorie producers and, you know, producers of yields, they're entrepreneurs, they're inventors and innovators, they're teachers who share their innovations with others, and maybe most importantly, that they're stewards of the land who are rarely recognized for the ecosystem services they provide that really benefit us all, including, you know, helping mitigate climate change. And I'll just conclude, you know, with what Chef Barber described last night. The recipe for sustainable agriculture is constantly evolving and changing. And I don't think the main ingredients are growth and scale. I think that they're around knowledge and innovation, diversity and equality. So I'll end there. I'm really looking forward to this discussion with these panelists and with you, the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny.
I'm Ron Shaich. I am the founder and CEO of Panera Bread. Just a little bit about Panera. Nearly 2,000 restaurants, $4.5 billion. Essentially, we serve 1 out of every 30 Americans every week. And from my perspective, it's really a story of being on the front lines of this struggle and what it really means. And I think it begins first in every organization with ultimately what you're committed to and what you value. And we come at it in Panera, both in an organizational sense and personally. Organizationally, this is what many of our consumers want. This is actually the largest and most growing market segment in the country. But there's also a perspective to it that's very personal. And I think we want to look at it and want to think about it in terms of that. It's frankly a question of the way I think and I eat. And my own perspective is a calorie isn't a calorie, and there's a better way and a worse way to do it. And I think that the nutritional community has come together and broadly understands that. But I have young kids, and my kids are eating in my restaurants every week. And it's not simply a place where we make our incomes, it's a place where we live. And I think that the more we're able to think about and talk about our businesses in the context of that, it's powerful. For us, that commitment took form in terms of action. And so for us now, going back many, many years, we removed all non-naturally occurring trans fats. It took form 10 years ago in removing any poultry raised with antibiotics and moving to antibiotic-free poultry, and we can talk about that. It takes form in organic ingredients, in some of them. It took form for us now, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, well before it was required by the government to put caloric information up. And we're providing full nutritionals on all of our products to the greatest degree possible in many of our ordering systems. And I think we reached a crossroads some time ago and made a decision that we were going to essentially serve what we call clean food. And what that means is food free of artificial colorings, flavorings, and preservatives. And we're going through the process of removing all that with a commitment to have it done by the end of 2016, a public commitment. And so my perspective on it is to tell just a bit of the stories from the front lines. And I would say this, and that is that one of the most powerful ways to change the world is through the marketplace. And the marketplace moves the world. And I can remember when we first came up with this crazy idea of pulling all the antibiotics out of our poultry. And a lot of people thought we were nuts, not the least of which was my board and a number of our constituents. The cost at that time was roughly 150% of the price of conventionally raised chicken. And we're talking, in Panera's case, not Walmart, but we're buying truckloads of this every week. And I remember we made the decision to go for it. We couldn't get the supply. Ultimately, we got the supply. As we began to move into it, a number of people followed. Chipotle came at the same time. We were buying the white meat. They were buying the dark meat, as I understand it, off the same chickens, literally. And it is now manifested itself where the price of antibiotic-free chicken is just pennies more than conventionally raised chicken. And today, we're in a world where, imagine this, Chick-fil-A has now announced they're going antibiotic-free. And so what I'm trying to say is if we really want to change the world, we've got to begin by changing our consumer, and we've got to bring marketplace pressures to bear. Because the marketplace does work in affecting progress. The other thing I would say, and again, by way of a story, is to say as we face the issue of removing preservatives from all of our food, seems simple. Just do it. But it isn't. It goes all the way back into the supply chain. And it goes not to our suppliers, but their suppliers and their suppliers. And here's the challenge. The whole supply chain has grown up for now 50 years with a belief that every product has to have 40 days of shelf life. Why? Because that's the way the distribution systems are built. You can't move product through large, massive distribution systems, the Ciscos of the world who supply much of the restaurant industry, unless you change the distribution system. And for us, that ultimately meant the only way to do it is to actually deliver to each of our restaurants every single day, and to actually create our own distribution to enable us to do it. And so today we have 21 facilities around the country that are actually manufacturing. They're bringing produce in, and they're actually delivering on a daily basis so we can begin to use that to accomplish what we want. But my ultimate and last story and point is that the world does change. The key to it is transparency and information. And the work that so many of you are doing in trying to educate and help people get there is what supports folks like us who want to support that and allows us to take the kinds of steps we do with antibiotic-free chicken and have the kind of effect we've had. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Patrick.
I'm Patrick Holden. I'm founding director of the Sustainable Food Trust, and I'm a farmer in West Wales, as Michael has said. And to your question, Michael, can sustainability scale both before and after the farm gate? I think the short answer is yes, it can and it must. But I think it's good that you drew attention to the different issues which apply to the different stages in production and distribution, because starting with before the farm gate, I think this is probably the nettle which needs to be grasped, not least because of what's been said this morning, because our present food systems are clearly unsustainable. There's the 10-to-1 calorie statistic and many others that have come up. And my experience after 41 years of not using any nitrogen fertilizer or pesticides on my farm in West Wales, which is a rather privileged position to have a long-term relationship with a piece of land and see the outcome of what you did over time, is that the news is fantastically encouraging, and it's all because of what you were saying about soil. And I think that we are at the end of a chapter of agricultural history where we were thinking in terms of chemistry, and the new chapter is going to be all about biology. And you also said that the earth is the stomach of the plant. The soil is the stomach of the earth. I think it's even more defined than that. It's like the collective exogenous stomach of all the plants that grow in the world. So imagine the soils of the world are like a vast stomach of digestion and refinement. And our task as farmers is to work out ways in which we can enhance the biological activity of the soil. And I'm going to tell this against myself. I headed up the Soil Association for 15 years. And theoretically, I knew all about soil, and so I did intellectually. But this metaphor that you brought up this morning, the stomach metaphor, our own stomach and the plant's stomach, has enabled me to see that I'm just at the beginning of what I can do to lift the biological fertility of my soils. But the key point that I want to share is that my yields now are going up. And I think that I can do much, much more through rotational grazing, you mentioned that as well, and through learning more about the biology beneath my feet to improve yields further. So I think that's the first point. After the farm gate, This is very interesting because I think the question of sustainability comes into the frame here. I mean, I was very moved by the opening panel this morning, and the sustainable word was used very freely. And I think that one of the things that has come out of this meeting is that we need to develop a common language and an understanding of terms and definitions, because unless we can agree what sustainability means, then we could be using the word in panel discussions and mean something completely different. And for me, I'm pretty clear about what it means before the farm gate, but again, slightly maybe controversially, I'm going to say that having been so essentially associated with the development of organic standards, I now think the framing of sustainability needs to give way to a new discipline, because I think the problem of defining organic or non-organic creates a sort of polarization between the two communities, and that is becoming very unhelpful. And even, you know, I get inspected, and I even wrote the first draft of the organic dairy standards back in the 80s. We were just writing down more or less what we were doing with our cows at the time. But now it's become, are you organic? Yes, oh, you're good and you're morally superior. Are you not organic? Inference, you're unsustainable and bad. And that's so unhelpful, and I get inspected every year. And I've come to dread it in a way, because it's
news,
just...
ladies and gentlemen, that Patrick Holden is saying we need to move beyond the idea of a fixed organic standard.
I'm saying
Elaborate.
I'm a great believer in the organic market, and I shall remain committed to farming organically. But I think that the way in which I want to assess my farm in the future is to measure against some indices and metrics which will be common to all farmers. So I can look at my soil fertility. Am I doing better than last year? I can look at my nutrient cycling or my biodiversity indices and score myself, and I want to go higher. And that can still be compatible with the organic market. You could have a threshold of, you know, if there were 100 points, you've got to be above 60, no GMOs, no pesticides, whatever it is. But personally, I know I'm not that sustainable, and I want to get more sustainable. So I'm interested in framing the thing in a different way, and I think that's important. After the farm gate, I used to be a carrot grower.
We don't have time for your carrot story. Hopefully we'll get it, because I know how long your carrot story takes exactly. Okay. And it's a great story, and I will give you a chance to tell it. And if I don't, one of the questioners should say, what's Carrot Gate? Thank you. Those are all really important points. We'll get Kathleen Merrigan working on those new standards. I'm sure she'll be happy to dive in again. I'd like to pick up on what Ron said about antibiotics and maybe challenge Jack a little on this question. You know, there seems to be the earth is shifting around the issue of antibiotics. We heard it from the first panel this morning, the Farmers and Ranchers panel, that there is some desire, it sounds like, to get beyond it. There was a lot of hope that the administration would ban the use of antibiotics in livestock, and they've taken an important step, but it's still a voluntary step. But the market seems to be outracing them. So, Jack, I'd like to start with you, and this must be a question you look at if you're concerned about sustainability. And you could probably single-handedly drive this change for the whole food system. Why not?
Yeah. We're spending a lot of time looking at this particular issue at the moment. There's no doubt there's some market demands, and I agree with Ron. Often the marketplace is going to drive change as more effectively than someone else standing up and saying it's going to change. There's clearly some issues that the meat industry talked about this morning around when an animal is unhealthy. Do we leave the animal unhealthy? Because at the moment, what you've got to do is you've got to source antibiotic-free. And the only way you can get antibiotic-free, if it's not the whole system, is to have if it's the whole system, is to have sick animals. And that's not, I don't think anyone wants that. So there is a role to play for antibiotics in making sure that animals that get sick don't stay sick, and I think that's an important message that was said this morning. But as the customer increasingly demands this, we're increasingly looking at what should our stance be in this space, and it's probably something you're going to see something from us in the future.
The future?
Yes.
I thought you were going to say in calendar year 2014 or 15, but okay, the future.
Yes.
Can I say, Michael?
The point of demand, sorry.
No, I just wanted to say I haven't used any antibiotics in the udders of our dairy cows for more than 20 years. It's surprising what can be done if there's a demand.
Yeah.
It really is possible to we may have to move into a post-antibiotics era, but I think my news is that it can be done.
And in the organic dairy space, we've spent a lot of time looking at we were in Vermont looking at, we're trying to sell a lot more organic product, and we're selling tons more, and we're selling it at a price that's at conventional prices. And to try and get the demand where it needs to get the supply where the demand is going actually involves quite a complex web of how do you sell more butter, how do you sell more yogurt, how do you sell more, make the whole, somebody mentioned this morning, making the whole thing work. It's not just about selling more organic milk, it's about how you make the whole balance play through, about the story of Panera and Chipotle. How do you make the white meat and the dark meat come together? If we're going to grow more organic meat or more antibiotic-free meat or more organic dairy, it has to be done in a sustainable way, and I mean that by buying all elements of the animal or buying all elements of the product of the animal. And that's one of the challenges of the kind of fruit and veg industry as well. How do we make the whole thing work? And then the demand will the supply will catch up at the right price.
Let me
You heard about the opportunity for turkey butts. Did you hear that?
Absolutely.
I'm going to leave that to Jack. Yeah. I want to throw another point in, and I want to push on some folks in the audience. I want to say that one of the most powerful ways this happens for Jack, for us, people that want it, is the role of the nutritional community, the role of journalists. So, you see, there's so much information coming at consumers, but the reality is most of it is actually shared by all of us. And when we send there's so much information overload and information clutter, such that oftentimes consumers don't actually understand what is prevailing knowledge about what is actually good for them and healthy. And the more we're able to give voice to what is good and what is good for people, not just the extremes and not just the tangential items that we disagree on, where research has not come to agreement, the better we're going to be able to be a force of positive change and actually support guys like Jack and myself in trying to take these leaps of faith.
Do you think the government, I'd love to get to your point on this, do you think the government has a role to play in this, or is it just people talking to consumers and
I think the
consumer driving
government
change?
is in some ways a recipient of the same information coming from the consumer marketplace. Look at the evolution in the food guidelines. You know, it's gone from grains to greens. And that's been an effect of so many of you in this audience, so many people talking about it, and a coming together of the nutritional community. And all I'm trying to suggest is the degree to which we can come together and speak about what we all share and know, as opposed to focus on small research in which we're in disagreement, actually will serve the cause.
Great, Dan.
I just want to build on that point about the need for journalists and something I mentioned before about storytelling and inspiring people instead of scaring them. And I think, you know, people in my world have done that for a long time. It's been doom and gloom, and you know, the end of the world is coming. And you know, what I've tried to do and what Food Tank tries to do is really, you know, give people stories of hope and success so that they have something. You know, we talk about the problems because obviously we need to, but you also have to talk about the solutions and put them out there in a way that's palatable for folks to understand, and give them the opportunities to change, whether they're policymakers or eaters or businesses or whoever else, you know, has a stake in this, and that's 7 billion of us. So, I mean, I think we need to work on the inspiration part of the story.
I think you couldn't be more right.
Just a piece to back up what Danielle said. We've just done an extensive amount of research on this. Very interesting. The single biggest issue for many consumers is the conflict they feel between what they want to eat and what they think they should eat. And our ability to help bring that together is a powerful way to help and support the consumer and ultimately the marketplace.
Absolutely.
But I would just underscore what you're saying, that, you know, we've heard a lot about polarization, but speaking as a journalist and on behalf of the New York Times, what you're suggesting is that the critique that's been voiced about big ag, if you will, and the use of pharmaceuticals in livestock and all that, and the nitrogen and all these kind of things, you're saying are having a positive effect through changing consumer behavior, and that's the driver of change that you see as most powerful. So I think that's an interesting point. So, you know, beating on big ag has some value. That's for the U.S. farmers and ranchers.
And the only point I'd make to that, Michael, sometimes the food marketers have latched on to some of the work from the journalists and the authors and created a scaremonger around food, which I don't think is a positive thing.
Right.
I think that's some of the messaging and the labelling becomes scaremongering rather than very positive and proactive, and that's the kind of thing, the message you get from Chipotle and Panera, which is very positive, as opposed to what's bad, tell you what's good, and I think that's a very positive thing for the food industry, and that's more likely to stimulate demand in the right way and move this forward fast.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So Patrick, you've got some carrots. You have a lot of carrots, and you'd love to sell them to Walmart. How can Walmart help you out?
Well, Jack, I know you used to work for Tesco's.
Yes.
And when I was a carrot grower for many years, but now I'm an ex-carrot grower.
Okay.
I used to supply Tesco's and Sainsbury's and Waitrose. And originally I supplied a small pack house in Lambton, West Wales. But then, due to the economic benefits of scaling and having just one central pack house as opposed to half a dozen, which they were when I first started growing carrots, the supermarkets, completely understandably, because you're driven by the best business case, started closing down the pack houses. And as a result, eventually, there was only one pack house which was supplying all the carrots for Waitrose and Sainsbury's, which I was supplying at the time. And that was situated in the eastern counties of England, 230 miles from my farm. So I quietly, well, I didn't quietly, I stopped being a carrot grower, not an ex-carrot grower,
yes.
Only because I couldn't make the economics of it work. And I think there's an interesting discussion point here, because sometimes the best business case is not in the public interest or in the interest of the planet. And the theme of true cost accounting has come up a couple of times this morning already. Unless we get some of these externalities identified and we work up novel mechanisms for taxing practices which have damaging consequences either to public health or to the environment, and rewarding farmers like the carbon stewardship thing, the idea of paying farmers to be carbon stewards, we're not going to get these sustainable systems to go mainstream, in my opinion, despite all the fantastic stories that we're hearing about, you know, entrepreneurs and profitability. I'm sure we'll have more this afternoon. We have to get into the economic engine room of this to enable people like you, Jack, to do the right thing.
Yeah, and I think from the point of view of the US today and what's happening here, the energy cost trend that was talked about earlier is forcing, and our customers want it, local product is cheaper for the customer because it doesn't have to travel as far. And because energy costs are likely to go in that direction, not this direction, we're seeing it a much more economic foundation for our local produce initiative.
So are you relocalizing your processing and distribution
lots of
hubs?
We're creating processing opportunity. Specifically at the moment, we're working in the Carolinas, we're working in Michigan, we're working in the Mississippi River Delta, taking products that were getting produced in California, not because there's anything wrong with California, it just takes a long time to get lettuce from California to Maine. So there's opportunities for us to do things in a very economically sound way and create new pack houses, new hot houses. And I think energy costs are one of the drivers to that going forward, as well as truly understanding the externalities that was talked about.
I hope you're talking to your ex-colleagues back in the United Kingdom, because I don't see those trends happening at home. I see this centralisation still going on. Yeah.
I watch it from afar now.
Jack, you know, one of the founding principles of Walmart is everyday low prices,
yep.
And the idea of cheap food is central to your business model. And we've heard a lot in the last 2 days that cheap food is the problem, and that a lot of what needs to happen in the food system, whether it's removing nitrogen or removing antibiotics or hormones from beef, will add something to the cost of food. You're now trying to sell organic at no premium, which is quite a audacious thing to do, but a lot of people in this room probably makes them nervous that, you know, somehow you'll be squeezing those producers so hard that yep. There'll be pressure on them to cut corners, or they'll go broke. So how do you reconcile your devotion to everyday low prices with your devotion to sustainability?
Well, I think it relates to the foundation of the customers that we serve. We serve 140 million customers, which is America. And most people want to try and buy the everyday things in life as cheaply as they can so that they can do other things with their money and send their kids to college and have vacations or do whatever they want. And so this principle of saving money and saving people money so that they can live better is right in the DNA of our business, which has grown from one little store in Northwest Arkansas to 10,000 stores across the world in a relatively short space of time. So that principle is at the core of who we are. So the challenge for us when it comes to the changing pattern organic. We've only been selling food for 20 years. We're a pretty young food business. So as we kind of learn our way through this, what we're trying to do is bring our scale to bear so that we make much more profitable growers, give much more longer-term contracts on that. One of the things that I think is fundamental to the organic challenge that we face, and we're chasing after volume, as I explained to you, in the dairy industry in Vermont, across the country, we're looking for more organic product. And we want to create a business model that's going to make it more efficient, not less efficient. And that, I think, involves longer-term contracting. I think it involves trying to cut out some
with individual farmers or with cooperatives?
Or collectives or cooperatives. But the principle of having a longer-term contract that allows you to manage the ups and downs that was described again in one of the presentations this morning, I think is a fundamental one. The principle of trying to minimize the number of middlemen involved in that, and the principle of trying to manage the whole carcass, or manage the whole, if you're buying canned goods, taking a whole line and making it run all day long. It's amazing how much efficiency you come. And to your point, when it comes to over time, the economic premium isn't as much as you might originally think. And that's what we're working our way through. We're about two and a bit years into this program in organics. We've got a long way to go, but we feel we'll be in a position to provide our customers with what they want at the right price so that they don't have to pay more, and it'll allow us to develop more sustainable agricultural systems and make our growers and farmers and producers more profitable, not less profitable. And it's challenging our business, way of doing business, and it's forcing us, as we've got more into our supply chain and understanding it better, we've become better stewards of our business, and we think we've become better stewards of the environment as that's happened.
Danny, when you think about the farmers, the small farmers that you've spent so much time interviewing, and they're doing diversified crops on relatively small plots of land. And coming into their country now are retailers like Walmart, and coming into their country are American food chains like Panera or McDonald's or whatever. Are there opportunities for those farmers or just threats?
I mean, I think it's both. I think there are lots of opportunities for them to engage through farmers' unions and cooperatives and to mobilize themselves for change.
So they have to scale up through organization.
Yeah, but yeah, absolutely. I think that we need better farmers' organizations that can really give power to the farmers' voices. And this is what's really lacking, especially in the developing world. They're not able to organize themselves as well as they could or should be able to be. But there's also a lot of risks, because we're talking about very small-scale farmers who are, mostly producing food for themselves. They have some to sell at market. And what I would want, a Walmart or another corporation to be thinking about is the idea of really building and building resilience in local and regional food systems and economies so that those people are protected. These farmers, whether they're in cooperatives or not, are protected if there's conflict or a natural disaster or whatever else happens in the market. And I think that that's maybe not what a lot of these companies are thinking about and should be.
But long-term contracts would perhaps help address that in some ways.
I think so. But again, it's going to take farmers' organizations to really mobilize to do that.
Do you agree, Jack?
Yeah, I do. And I think when you look at what we're doing in some of the developing world, Africa is a really interesting place for us in terms of how agriculture and farming is evolving there. And we're working very closely on the ground with some of my colleagues directly with how we can develop farmer cooperatives and farmer organizations that can supply our growing business in that market. And it's the same in Central America. We've done a lot of work there and trying to work with farmers. And the point about women's a really big factor in the middle of this as well. If we can encourage more women into agriculture, it significantly improves the quality and the performance of the product that we get, and significantly improves the profitability that people are dealing with.
Encourage more women in agriculture. They're already in agriculture.
But it's clearly beneficial for everybody.
I want to take some questions from you. This thing isn't really working very well, so I'm going to recognize hands here, right there. Yes, you. Wait, we wait for a microphone. Can we get a microphone to Drew?
Hi, this question is mostly for Jack and deals with the question of long-term contracts, especially with organic producers and I guess not really accounting for the risk of production for that producer. So while the contract might B, for a long amount of time, the producer is still bearing the risk of weather and crop loss. And so how do you kind of square up how those long-term contracts might work better for the producer, especially in organic, where it might be more risky to produce a crop than in conventional?
Well, what we want to do is see the economics over a period of time, so that if it's a 5-year contract, we'll see the economics over the 5-year period of the contract. So if there's a year where we can't get enough because it simply isn't available, it simply isn't available. So the key is the profitability over the period of the time, given the vagaries of it. And the more farmers you can get into, the more farmers can play in that. Somebody again mentioned this morning how you can move these things around, how you rotate it around with different farmers, have different contracts with different people. That protects us in terms of being able to access what we need. And then giving each individual entity a long-term profitability goal. I think it should adjust for the vagaries of what happens in any one year or not. But having said that, we're right in the middle of how to build contracts that make these work.
Right. Yeah, I was really thinking from the perspective of the individual producer who...
Why don't you identify yourself in this?
I'm Drew Goodman, and I started Earthbound Farm with my wife Myra on 2 acres, and we have...
you must sell a lot of lettuce to Jack.
We have at one time, and they have been very influential in moving the organic marketplace, and we've done business with you, and Earthbound is now a 30,000+ certified organic operation. And, but there have been challenges in kind of the retail model with the contracts that have, from our experience, not really been as easy to overcome as just the long-term contract. So I was just wondering, I don't want that to kind of seem to this group as like a panacea that's going to fix it for the individual producer on their land when they have crop damage or failure, because there is really no accounting for that back to the individual ranch.
Well, that's wise counsel, and I respect what you've done as a business. You're a great brand and a great supplier to us. Maybe if you've got some, we'll talk after about some good ideas how we can get through that.
That would be great. Thank you.
Great. I'm going to take a question on this side. Okay, first Jim, then you.
Actually, Michael, this one's for you.
No.
Certainly taught many of us in the room about these issues early on, and this has been an amazing dialogue, and I think some of the key points have been around transparency, and we've seen a lot of transparency moved. I mean, Walmart, the fact that the majority of your seafood is sustainable seafood is amazing. McDonald's, 100% of their seafood now is sustainable seafood. I think what Panera is doing is awesome. You're certainly moving in a transparent way. Whole Foods Market led the universe in this, I think, in creating a lot of sustainable and transparency systems. So, Michael, based on that, what's the next 10 years like in terms of really building transparency into our food system to truly create a sustainable food?
Well, I wasn't prepared for that, but well, this is something I've talked to Jack about. I mean, Jack and I have been in dialogue for a long time, and one of my dreams has always been to add a second barcode to all the products in our supermarket, one that you could take to a scanner in the supermarket, and it would bring up any kind of information you want about that farm. It would take us into that hog confinement operation with a live cam picture of, okay, that's how those hogs are raised, and it's cost this, and that's how these hogs are raised. It would tell us the slaughter date and a little bit about the slaughterhouse where the animals died. It would have not just ingredients and things like that, but production. And essentially retailers could challenge suppliers to, look, we want you to provide this information, we want to, and those who did would have access to those shelves. I mean, I think that there is that not everybody would want to look at all that information, but the fact that it was there would be incredibly reassuring. It's the internet version of the glass abattoir, right? When you take down those walls behind which a lot of industrial food is hidden, and give people a technological window on the system. I think it would drive a lot of change without any regulation. And retailers can drive that. I mean, Whole Foods could drive it, Walmart could drive it, and so that's my 10-year dream. Yeah, Ron.
I'd love to throw out a thought to it. I think much of transparency today, by folks like us, is what I call passive. It's an assumption we put out information and the consumer is going to make the right choice. Having said that, I think that information, that is to say transparency, needs to move from passive to assertive. And it needs to help people begin to understand what the implications of what they're doing is. And you can take the implications of sugar. And it's an issue in our own business. Are we going to remove all added sugar? What are we going to do? How do we do that in a way in which it's consistent with what we're trying to do to serve the consumer? And one of the questions that I ask is, do we actually provide people with the implications of what that glass of soda is actually going to do to them compared to the WHO standards on sugar consumption? And I want to just push for that, if I may.
Michael, great contribution. And yes.
With the American Meat Institute, aka Big Ag. And I just wanted to first say that on the glass abattoir idea, we actually have 3 of those videos already hosted by Temple Grandin, unscripted. We're making a 4th one. If anybody wants to see the inside of a typical slaughterhouse, search Glass Walls Temple Grandin, and you'll see them. But my question is, I'm hearing a lot of terms like Big Ag and industrial farming. And my question is, really, I represent members large and small. Tyson probably was a push cart selling sausage one day, and he succeeded, and he got big because people liked his product. That happens to a lot of companies. At what point do you cross that line in your minds and go from good to bad? And also, I don't understand what you mean by industrial farming, and that term's being used a lot. So I would just like to clarify the terminology, because I know a lot of really good big companies, and I know a lot of really good small companies, and I think we're having a very black and white discussion.
Anybody want to take that? Patrick, you want to answer that?
I don't think it is that black and white. I think we're really grappling with the most important issues. And I want to say this, that although I can see and agree with everything you said, Jack, about all the actions you're taking and commend them, I can't help feeling that the economies and efficiencies that you're planning are not, just speaking as an individual citizen, quite how I imagine that I would like to relate to my food in the future. And it's the 90th anniversary of Rudolf Steiner's agriculture lectures. He gave them in June 1924, and I'm going on to the biodynamic conference after this. And one of the things that Rudolf Steiner said in his agriculture lectures is we should see the farm as an ecosystem. And he also included the human being in this relationship. And it seems to me that food is crucial to our sense of identity, of who we are, and our relationship with landscape and place. And if you think about the biome and this amazing new science on the biome, I think that our stomach and what we eat needs to, in a similar way to the farm, be somehow reconnected to our landscape and our region. And I'm not saying that that's possible at the moment with the current economics, where the externalities aren't factored into the equation. But I feel that that really is in the public interest, to have a direction of travel towards relocalization. And the economics of that are very difficult at the moment.
Good point. I would add to that, in answer to your question, or partial answer to that question, is that, I don't think the issue is big versus small, and I would submit that it is the Farmers and Ranchers Alliance that uses that term a lot more than we do. We talk a lot about farms based around the idea of an ecosystem, as you mentioned, as opposed to the idea of a factory with inputs and outputs. And there are big farms that succeed in doing that very well, and I think we need to highlight them more. There are corn and bean farms in Iowa today and Indiana today that have discovered the power of cover cropping and compost, and they're still producing corn and beans, but they've diversified. Yeah. I think diversification is another key, getting away from monoculture. So there's a whole lot. There is a meaningful definition, and I've tried to spell it out in a lot of my writings. But so I just wanted to not leave your question unanswered. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm a pediatrician, and I'm really just pleased to be part of this conversation. And I think that what's going on here, I feel in the front lines. And so in scalability, the question really becomes, we're interdependent. I think people have brought that up, and I think that and the language. As a pediatrician, moms are coming in, dads are coming in. What I deliver to them is in the world that you guys are creating. And it's very difficult sometimes because from the journalists to the papers, there's a lot of information out there. And they hit me with, I Googled this, and this is a bad name, and this. And I think the sense was, and it was brought up, we can't really have villains. I mean, we can't look at each other across the table here and in this room that there's a villain here. That it's how are we going to solve the problem together? And how are you going to deliver to me a message that's got information behind it, that's solid, that everybody should be able to survive, bring people up, elevate people from poverty. But how do we get that message so that my peers in medicine and in, you know, that we raise the next generation of kids that will be getting a good plate full of food, whatever good plate, my pyramid, those are not really actionable for me in the office, but I imagine someone can help create something like that. And I guess challenge you guys to deliver me something that's less about rhetoric and less about, you know, good and bad and evil, but about what can we do to make life better for everybody.
Thank you. Tom.
Questions for Jack. I'm really pleased to hear that Walmart is doing such amazing work with organics, with sustainable seafood. Yesterday in my panel, I pointed out that if a sixth of our population cannot afford to feed themselves, how is that sustainable? And when a great number of Walmart employees cannot afford to shop in Walmart without public assistance, without government assistance, how is that sustainable and how are you addressing it?
Well, from a point of view of opportunity at Walmart, I think it's probably the place that we're literally, I don't know how many hundreds, tens of thousands of people have been promoted in the last few months. It's an amazing place for where people can come without a lot of educational background, without a lot of background that would suggest that they're going to be very prosperous. It's an amazing place for promoting people. And the statistics, which I've not got in my head, are amazing. And we've got people who've started from the very bottom running our company now. People who started off pushing carts running our company now. It's a place of opportunity. And I think the country's a place of opportunity. I've just become an American citizen. I'm so proud to have become an American citizen because it's a place where you can do anything. And the world lets you do anything. And it doesn't America lets you do anything. You had Hamdi Ilukaya here yesterday, who has done an amazing job, turned something from nothing into $1 billion in no time. You've got Walmart, you've got Panera, you've got businesses that transform landscapes and economics from it. And Walmart has been part of that heritage. And we're very proud of what we've done. We're very proud of what we do in terms of local food. Very proud of what we do in terms of selling products with less sodium, less sugar, less fat, at an affordable price for the customer base. We've got a very good track record with our associates, a very good track record of opportunity, and it's something we're very proud of. And we don't need to worry, we don't need to apologize for what we do.
Okay. Microphone over here. We've got probably time for 2 more questions.
Hi, my name is Sujeen, and I'm at Chobani. My question is, it seems that in motivating consumers to eat healthier, a huge pressure point is price and accessibility. But it seems that just by human nature, people are attracted to purchase things that they just find appealing. And a lot of that seems to come from branding. And I'm curious, at Walmart and at Panera, your thoughts on the interaction between price and availability and accessibility, and how businesses are actually branding their packages to make healthier foods more attractive.
You've been getting pushed here, so I'll take it.
No, this one's for you, Ron.
Right? I think there is a powerful intersection we forget, which is this intersection between food and food that's a celebration of all that food is and it means in our history, our culture, and our personhood, and food that's good for you. And when we're able to bring both together, that's ultimately the kind of voice of a positive lifestyle that you hear being talked about. And I think we've got to shift it away from what you shouldn't do, even though there's legitimacy to that, and shift into what is good for you to do for its own sake. And then that ultimately has to taste good, and it has to be safe to people. And by safe, I mean it has to be in a language, in a sense of cultural identity of what they want to eat. And when we're able to do that, we as retailers, we as food people, we're able to actually offer people a solution. And that's sort of how I come to it.
Can I comment on
Yeah,
that
please.
briefly? Because I talked to your colleague, Scott Davis, a lot about this. And the reason, if I'm correct, that you wanted to switch to antibiotic-free was this journey of taste. It was providing better taste for people. And I think when we're at food conferences like these, and especially in my world where we're talking about hungry people all over the world, we forget that food is supposed to taste good. And we're supposed to enjoy it, and it's supposed to be delicious. And it's not just about making calories, it's about making food that people enjoy. And whether they live, in the developing world, or whether they get to come to Stone Barns and eat, delicious meals cooked by Dan Barber. And I think that's a point that needs to be made. Everyone deserves delicious food.
Absolutely.
Thank you, and I think that's an excellent note to end on, Danny. Thank you very much. Thank you to the panel.
Thanks a lot.
Food is joy.
Food is joy.
Thank you, Danny.
Thank you so much.